I am net Universitan. And Virgilius already doesn't like what he sees. And I doubt it's going to get any better. Previously on Leviathan. Virgilius, the Red Gaze, got back on track after his battle with the docent, and then found Gubo, the representative of N Corp, that let his 2 female escorts die so that he could get inside the corridor. Through a mix of deceit and asking the right questions, he found out from Gubo that Asia was a researcher that Herman Isra, director of N Corp, wanted back. The same researcher who was working on the glass technology, a possible singularity, a less stable rival of the mirror technology invented by Yi Sang. And after an attempt to stab a color fixer, ended with Gubo being humiliated and choked by Virgilius, he let him go and they searched together, after finding the lab and catching up with Garnet, or rather the cocoon containing him, along with a number of distortions around. He thought about the family that, unknown to him, was falling apart due to a number of reasons. And now, the continuation. What was rising from the floor was a cry. The first thing that all humans do is cry. Well, if you're unable to regulate your own body temperature and aren't used to what's outside, well, you'd be crying too. Then there's that old story about being kicked out of paradise because of the sin of coveting a fruit. Ah, yes, that one. Because being in happy and blissful ignorance is better. Apparently humans cry again and turn their backs on life, because the sin embraced was too big. Ah, yes, sin. Limbus Company seems to revolve around that. It's even in the lyrics of the theme song. Virgilius thought about this as he looked at the red jewel, or egg, in the middle of the room, seeing it as pointless to call Garnet's name as he found his gladius on the floor, which wasn't out of disrespect, as he knew that Garnet didn't treat anything like that. This is despite living in an orphanage where ownership was vague and how survival in the city works had to be learned early. He kept one of the gift wrappers that Virgilius gave something in. That says a lot. The gladius on the floor was basically him saying, "You can have it back now, sir. I won't be needing it anymore." Virgilius picked it up, and then the poor imitation of a grass-type Pokemon crawled up to him. Gubo pulled his knife out, but Virgilius stopped him before he could stab the Distortion. Virgilius reminded Gubo of his original purpose of being there. Gubo was about to ask why, when his puzzled expression was broken when he saw his primary target, Asia. As for the Distortion itself, it had a sloppy look, a hole wide open that functioned as a mouth, as if trying to put something in it. Like she was one of those priests in The Mummy. Seemingly like it would only wander in the past, present, and future, lost in time. Then a cracking sound was heard as the thinly clustered teeth cracked with skeins of thread, similar to dandelion flower seeds, but in this case would never have wings as the weight they were carrying was too heavy. Virgilius saw it as pointless to cut its head off. He then decided to activate the heating mechanism of his gladius, to the point where it was smoking red. Yes, smoking red hot, to be more precise. And then he thrusted it into the Distortion's mouth. Ooh, that has got to hurt. The teeth were not allowed to reach him. The gladius made heat and provided burning that spread and permeated. Unfortunately, the gladius overheated, which sealed the Distortion's snout, but the eyes were still staring at him. The mouth didn't give up. It wasn't persistence. It was a desire to chew and swallow. He pulled it out, and then a fishy sensation filled his head, the sound of crying blurring his vision, and memories of the past rushing through them. Wealth was always coveted. Enough was never enough. Denver was the first of his fixers to realize that. Due to frenzied starvation. Ah yes, the chicken bones. Desire was all that Denver focused on, to the disregard of anything else. So what if the roads were broken? He wanted more than chicken bones for a meal, which he ate out of pure desperation. Virgilius saw himself as no different. Actually, it was worse. The children of the nursery school, protecting the office, to endure on his own. Yes, justification can allow for what was once something that he'd hesitate to do, to be done without a second thought. At least if it was done enough. All just to survive. To get rid of the hunger. He even hinted at turning to cannibalism. Not for fun, but due to desperation. Yeah, he doesn't sound like someone who's from District 23. Then again, Callie was from there, and she's alright. As he was thinking this, he tore the flesh that had gotten stuck to his gladius off. Then Maestro Jumsun spoke to Virgilius, telling the Red Gaze that he didn't seem to know. He was breathing heavily due to the wounds of his previous battle, along with the missing left arm. Although Virgilius didn't know if it was Garnet that did this or, well, what we know as distortions that caused that damage. Virgilius asked, what they were as he approached the ring maestro, with the eyes that judge how sinful. But there was another cry that he heard as he twisted the handle of his gladius to heat it. It was the Tim Burton distortion. Several legs were making it crawl to them. He screamed out loud. He recognized what was on this one. A scarf with blue and black patterns scattered on it. It was owned by one of the children in the nursery. He recalled painful memories, which he remembered that day when he was a child, when he would receive generous gifts and blessings, which made the children not sleep properly due to the anticipation. He also remembered the weight of the bag he was carrying that day, 6 months previously. Garnet said that the reason why the children waited so impatiently wasn't due to the gifts, but to see him joyful and full of laughter on that day. He even forgot to put on his shoes, which made him laugh involuntarily. He remembered this as he cut at the Tim Burton distortion, but this one was tough, the flesh smashing everywhere. Not wanting to see this as the same as who it reminded him of, he cut off its ankles, which severed all its legs. Unfortunately, it didn't die. It slumped down, and it cried in a way that vibrated, which made its flesh wriggle. This made him remember his early visits to that orphanage where he delivered the children of that syndicate. Yes, the one that he brutally murdered the parents of. He was still hesitant to go there. Then a child grabbed his hand, noting that his hands were really tough. Well, if you're battle-hardened, you'd have that kind of hand too. He felt that child's hand on the back of his hand. It was warm, but Virgilius was missing the passion. He wanted to think of warmth, even if it was deception and hypocrisy. Then he snapped back to reality. Jumsun asked, How, even knowing that? And then Virgilius, thoughts, how could he be so carefree? Yes, he didn't say this, but Jumsun found this better for the red gaze, as his surprise made him happy. He then ordered Azir to gather all the rift generators towards him, to focus on one thing. He had a slightly distorted expression on his face that felt ugly to him. Azir asked if he could afford to do so. Jumsun asked, what if he can't handle it? Ordering the same refractive index as before, then correcting himself, saying, raise it to maximum, shouting in ecstasy. Azir warned the ring maestro that the number of cracks in the window would reach an absurd number. Jumsun told him that he accepted that child too, so why can't he do so? Then turning his attention to Gubo, asking if he's looking forward to it too, asking what he would be. Gubo found it hard to deny. He was looking at Maestro Jumsun with an interesting expression, next to Azir. Not one worthy of one about to attack the enemy. They took a step towards the ring maestro, feeling a strange displeasure. Then for a moment, he felt a vibration. Looking around, all of the reflectors that were attached to the pods were aimed at one point, Jumsun. It was hitting their target hard. He was unable to comprehend what was going on. Although the scene in front of the color fixer and the N Corp representative, well, let's just say He'd go well with a double act with a ghost-possessed David Bowie bot. Yes, that one. The bizarre light, which brought pure joy and happiness to the mad arts fanatic. The expression didn't change as this was going on. Then Virgilius noticed a cry from a distortion that had a transparent body containing water within, which vomited it out with difficulty, pouring it on the floor. He shut its mouth to stop it from vomiting anything. Then he remembered another part of his past. He was a loner, which was probably for the best as a fixer, having to climb up alone, with no one behind your back. Closing his mouth to stop him from speaking anything idealistic. Closing his eyes to the poverty that was commonplace in the backstreets. Sealing his ears to the pleas of the destitute that might end up being attempts to lure him to his death. His heart was closed to all of that, yet he visited the orphanage where Lapis was, to prevent him from drowning in all that was weighing down on him. Then, back in the present, he saw Maestro Jumsun in his own egg. An indigo one. He was changing into something that wriggled, the shell twisted and stretched, which formed a human shape, despite it being hard and glossy with white scales, and having numerous indigo dots, along with a thick tail, where the contents of that egg hatched. It resulted in legs sprouting, which crushed the distortion in front, bursting the transparent skin and emptying out the contents. Then Virgilius saw the cherry-shaped ornament that had memories attached to it. It made him feel cold around the face and the neck, as water scattered and water droplets fell to the floor. Then he saw what Jumsun was as he fully came out of the egg, taking steps in front of him, one at a time, as his left arm had grown back, undoing Garnet's efforts. For some reason, I'm half expecting Virgilius to have hair spiking up and turning golden. The spots were all over his body, around the eyes, the tongue. Virgilius wouldn't be surprised if there were spots inside his body. Virgilius wanted to know what happened. Jumsun said that the universe conceived him again. An incomprehensible answer to a pure question. He was a distortion, except more stable, and indeed capable of speech than the ones that had just been taken out by Virgilius earlier. He walked and made black puddle-like dots appear in each spot where the footprints landed. It looked like it was being engraved. Then he heard the cries as the mark was touched, bursting out, feeling as if the body was exploding when it touched that dot, where it felt as if the body was covered in mold-like hives, but it wasn't dangerous to touch. Apparently Jumsun saw it as part of the pursuit of beauty, which was part of his job, which involved expanding that universe. His arms approached, right in front of his eyes. Virgilius reflexively readied his gladius and tried to cut them.
They clashed at each other's attacks. Jum-soon knew his attack method early on, a gesture that can only be recognized by touching it with the body to think that it had been grasped beforehand. It took a few minutes before he felt that it wasn't a coincidence. He preferred stabbing to slashing during combat. Well, if that's what you prefer, why not use a rapier or a spear? Something that involves thrusting something pointy in your enemies. Anyway, the reason for why he was going nowhere with Maestro Jim-soon was... well, that will be revealed later, as currently he was aiming for vital points, using his mind to add strength to the thrust. Maestro Jim-soon counterattacked each time he tried to strike at those vital points. And Jim-soon mentioned that he died to him piercing an artery 34 times, which would usually lead to death within seconds. And 46 times was when he died because he was pierced by his weapon around the neck, pointing at that area. Mentioning that as soon as he opened the distance, Virgilius threw a knife with its glowing ring there, pointing at his thigh. He recognized the vital points as the heart, the carotid artery around the neck, the artery around the thigh. All of them was blocked, so close combat was necessary, and then aim for the radial artery of the wrist. Clearly Virgilius has watched Terminator 2, as a knowledge of human anatomy can make you a more efficient killer. Apparently, all these moments were filling Jim-soon's body, filling in countless worlds, experience, swinging his feet with a voice that seemed relaxed. The trajectory of his attack passed lightly on his left arm. Then the spot spread to his body. He expected a localized explosion, but
he saw Lapis. His back was bleeding. A thin knife that she had inserted. She always showed up without anyone knowing when he was gifting gifts. Candy in her mouth and an innocent smile. Usually writing something teasing on a piece of paper and pasting it on his back. It became a sharp weapon. She asked why, the question digging deeper than the knife. Virgilius remembered that he killed her parents, and that was why she was in that orphanage in the first place. He felt that surprise. That he could have avoided this thought, or he could have been fighting, trying to ignore the agony, but he couldn't. She told him to give her and the others a plausible gift. If he pays monthly. Did he feel any relief? It wasn't comforting. Perhaps he wanted that day, looking at the gift in his hand, to stab her as hard as she could, rather than looking up at her with anticipation of when he would recognize the piece of paper behind his back. The way to care for your wounds by pointing at the corpses with the blade that cut her parents. Might be the tip of his thin blade, rather than the whistle he usually used to hurt, or the rolling candy in the mouth. Yes, this was a reality where Lapis found out the truth, and she did the last thing that a color fixer like Virgilius expected, Well, I wouldn't be surprised if, in that reality, she felt a bit, how can I put it, vengeful. Then he found himself before his office. It was a mess. A battle had clearly been fought. Nothing within that office was intact. Lan Yen was lying down, bent over, in a strange position. He was not in good shape. Dozens of cuts all over his body, hacked apart. Garnet was right next to him. It was a result of his judgment. They should have gone together, no matter what. He saw that it was right to listen to Garnet when he joined the operation. So the last world was one where Lapis found out that she was the child of one part of a syndicate, and then also found out that he was the one who killed her parents. As for this reality, Garnet spoke that Lan Yen was protecting him. He was professional and seasoned, even at that time. Then he stopped breathing. Virgilius wanted him to let him know his skill, or at least a warning. He looked at the dead Garnet. One day he remembered the figure of a man begging for his life. He made it impossible to do anything but. He was now. There was nothing that could be done. Lumps of sin. His weren't the only ones. He took the steps, gestures, and gazes he took. That was unhappiness and evil of someone else. He wasn't going to die as he was taking in that sin. He slapped hard on the cheek, the spots on his hand that was growing bigger and darker. Then they stopped. He remembered that in his reality, Garnet came with him to the auction. In fact, Garnet was in that red egg that had yet to hatch. Yes, he was experiencing other realities. Jumsoon was making him fall into his dotted universe, as if the spots were poison that didn't affect him like a typical poison. Asking if he wanted to die after going through different worlds. Asking if he wanted to fight him like that. He saw big and small spots in deep indigo, each a far-off world itself, which had the same function: to incapacitate and wear down those it affects. At least that's what Jumsoon was implying that he wanted to do to Virgilius, who was barely containing it. Jumsoon found it all ecstatic from many points that it was coming. Virgilius wanted to say more, but the words couldn't come out. The view reflected in front of him. The world kept changing. Endless possibilities that might have been, one by one stabbing him with sharp things. What seemed like an eternity was just fleeting. Then his vision fell into complete darkness, and a dreamlike voice began to whisper from somewhere. So warm. A voice that made him want to completely immerse it. Told him that it was nice to talk again. Now this makes me think that someone is at it again. In this case, trying to distort Virgilius, like Jumsoon has. along with how Garnet is distorting, as well as the others within that lab. I have a suspicion of who this voice is. In fact, this suspicion has been increasing. I'm of course talking about the possibility that it might be Carmen, which would put into question what Virgilius used during his battle against that docent. It might not be a psychomant, at least not a complete one. As if it was one, Carmen wouldn't have bothered with him, as those that manifest psychomants, at least according to Moses, the distortion detective, can't distort. It's likely to be part of an intermediate stage, like with Philip and Zhao, something that grants them great power, but they have yet to go down either path. The paths being manifesting psychomant or distorting. Well, that would certainly explain what was going on. Either that, or he has an augmentation fueled by emotion that we aren't aware of. Either way, she's talking to him, and it's clear that she wants him to give in, to reveal his true self. Well, the trailer for Limbus Company tells us that she fails, as if she succeeds, then, to prevent a contradiction to the narrative, Moses would need to reverse it enough for him to pass for human. But then again, she might want to do the same for Garnet. But that would also cause a contradiction to the narrative, if my suspicions of what he'll distort into are true. Yes, there are now two battles, one outside and within. Outside being Jumsun, inside being whatever voice is inside Virgilius' head. Until next time. Hail the rabbit!